Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Zession. If you are new here, we are excited that you are here with us and that you decided to join us today. My name is Mandy Rourke, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in Austin, Texas. I support individuals and couples and families, and I am also one of the co-founders of Zessio, and I'm here with my fellow co-founder.
I am Dr. Sapna again, fellow co-founder of Zessio, and we're excited to welcome you either for the first time or for an additional time back to Zessions. Zessions are conversations among clinicians where we talk about topics typically addressed in the mental health world so that the perspective of clinicians who support clients daily is understood better.
And today, our topic is getting to know anxiety. And we are really excited about this topic. There's also a little bit of anxiety as well, even in our preparation for this session. But we keep saying, you know what, that's okay. We're just getting to know our anxiety. We're going to welcome it in to this session and try to understand it and also offer some helpful perspectives for you all, or at least we hope we hope they will be helpful from how we think about anxiety, how we understand it, and also how we help our clients when they do deal with anxiety. Because what we do know is that every human has the capacity to experience anxiety. So before we get started, though, a little housekeeping, something, Doctor.
Yes. Before we start practicing live what we'll be talking about, a little housekeeping. We did want to share if you do enjoy our content, if it's been helpful to you in any way, please do consider liking, following, reviewing, giving a hopefully positive rating on any and all platforms where you listen to podcasts. We really appreciate the support, and any ratings and reviews really help more people find us and therefore help more people benefit from the resources that we are trying to put out and make more accessible. So we really appreciate the support. And additionally, you can also find us and interact with us more on any of our social media accounts. It's going to be at my Zessio, so MyZessio on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube, or Facebook. And you can access more mental health resources with us at zessio.com. So again, that's Zessio.com. And we've got more there for you, including the full recordings if you care for us to be right in your face.
Yeah, be a
We're here
Friday
for
night
that too.
viewing, you know? Sounds great. Thank you for the housekeeping, Sapna. And we are going to first start, like every session, we find it really important to start with defining what it is that we're talking about. And, I have to share with everyone, I've been practicing as a therapist for over 10 years now. And in preparation for this, I had to, and I think both of us wanted to spend some time researching anxiety a little bit more, doing a little bit more information seeking, if you will, to prepare ourselves for what is the definition of anxiety, right? It's one that seems like, oh, well, you feel anxious. It's like, well, what does that really mean? And so, a couple of the key lines that we found, if you will, or that we've experienced in our own work, is that anxiety is a feeling of worry, it's a feeling of nervousness, of unease. It's typically related to an imminent event or something that has an uncertain outcome. Another way that as we were talking about this before, it just feels like this persistent state of unease that something is actively wrong or something is going to be wrong. It's just this uncomfortable state of feeling or of experience. And there's a lot of feelings of fear and dread and uneasiness that's mixed into that has a lot of different physical sensations that we'll definitely be talking about more and kind of breaking this out. But just even rapid heart rate, even as I'm talking about this right now, I'm getting red splotches all over my neck. I'm hot and thinking about the fact that I am in a performance right now on a podcast and I'm feeling it. I'm feeling the anxiety in this experience. And so we're going to be kind of breaking this down more and more. And while I'm kind of giving you more of like what you would find online and or in any kind of like psychological blog, I think it's also helpful for us to talk about how, if a client were to ask, like, do I have anxiety, or how would you describe anxiety to a client, or even
Yeah.
just like family or friend? Like, what is it in our own
Yeah.
words?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you nailed it. It's a lot of what I would say. I also want to speak to kind of the having to sit and think about it a little bit harder. And I think part of that, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, is just because I feel like I have such an intimate relationship with anxiety that's just kind of like natural. And it's like, oh yeah, that's just anxiety now. Like we've gotten to know each other very well at this point. And so it might be a little bit of that, like too much intimate knowledge. It makes it a little bit harder to kind of zoom out and be like, yeah, specifically what is that and how does it look different from person to person? But I would agree. I think it's an imminent sense of worry, dread, um, something that tends to stick around longer than just situationally. And not to say that anxiety can't also be situational, it can also be managed and go away, but oftentimes it tends to crop up more and more often if it's not there kind of as a constant companion, oftentimes, depending on the level of anxiety or how we would phrase it, the level of your relationship with anxiety. Um, and just something that creates, again, certain physical sensations that can feel a lot like stress at times. And we'll kind of jump over to that relationship too. But it can also feel a lot more constant and can be related to certain situations. And it just can be another voice in the background worrying as well that is hard to shake.
hmm It can feel as if it's part of you, and it can be that way for many people. It can be a very temporary experience for some. It can be something that's prolonged, and it's something that when it is prolonged, it just becomes like like you're saying, it's like a constant companion. It's the way that you just experience your life day to day. It's almost like hard to imagine what it would feel like if you didn't have that, excessive worry or fear or just general state of unease. It's like I can't imagine what it would feel like to not have that rapid cycling of thought going all of the time. And when we were first talking about this, to me, it kind of feels like it can take up a lot of space too. I mean, it's like that elephant in the room type of feeling where it's like I'm here with my family. And I've got this elephant over here that sometimes feels like it's sitting on my chest because I am, somewhere else. And that somewhere else oftentimes can be like in the future. I'm thinking about something I don't know or something I'm uncertain about or I need more information about. And so it can feel like it just kind of sucks out a lot of energy, and it can be really exhausting and hard to manage. So we really hope that as we're talking through this today, that it'll help you get to know anxiety a little bit better. And we also just want to acknowledge that anxiety is such a topic that it was really hard for us to break down, you know, to narrow it down truly to fit all of this in, a 50-ish minute time slot. And so we really are going to, as you're listening today, take note of things that come up for you that you really want to dive into more, because that gives us a lot of information around how we can continue to support you with content that we create, whether it be like mini courses or whatever. So yeah, let's start though, I think, by breaking down the difference between anxiety and stress, because as we were talking about this, I was even finding myself like, man, I think of anxiety and stress pretty connected most of the time, and I have to consciously remember that there are times that you can feel stress without anxiety, and you can also feel anxiety without stress. And so yeah, let's start there when it comes to like the difference between stress and anxiety. how do you think stress is different?
So I think what tends to come up for me in thinking about the difference between stress and anxiety is largely stress tends to have some kind of an external factor that is triggering it.
Mhm.
Not to say anxiety doesn't as well, because anxiety and stress do tend to be buddies. Oftentimes, they do tend to amplify each other. But stress, typically, there's some kind of an event, or often multiple events that are kind of feeling overwhelming or feeling hard to cope with that tend to be a little more situational in nature. Not to say that stress can't become chronic, especially if those stressors tend to be chronic. Chronic meaning prolonged for long-term periods of time, in which usually it makes it a lot more easier for stress to invite anxiety along in that ride. Um, but I would say that stress tends to be provoked a little more externally by certain issues, situations, triggers, and anxiety can be, but also anxiety tends to be a lot more internal of like whether there is something to trigger it or not, it can be present.
Mhm.
Kind of my take. What about for you?
Yeah, I like that breakdown, and it's helpful to differentiate it in that way. Like stress is often from like an external stimuli, for the lack of a better way of saying it, or and anxiety is more internal, and anxiety can be a reaction to stress as well. It
Hmm.
makes me think about a lot of conversations that I've had with clients that have had really taxing work cultures or environments, and being a really, really stressful and really toxic environment that, each day they go to work, they do their best, but they also come home beyond stressed. And this cycle of stress every day in and out. And it may be something that they're trying to manage day to day, but it's also a real lived experience ongoing. And so, how I've definitely seen it in my work is that it can be really hard that, let's say, this person who has this job that is so challenging for them decides to take a new job. And so then they go to the new job and they're like, perfect, like I'm not going to have as much stress anymore. I'm going to feel so much better. And then there's definitely been a sense of this prolonged sense of excessive worry about, am I getting things done on time? Am I in trouble? Just insert any type of like, dread about timelines or deadlines or any of that type of stuff, where it's almost like, man, I got rid of that external threat that I had before, but it's almost like the body can and the mind can kind of adapt to this way of like always being in a very reactive, like threatened state. And also with it, just the newness of a job too, there is so much uncertainty. There's less of confidence in that role potentially. And so it makes sense why anxiety would creep in around like, some social anxieties that I've had a lot of clients deal with, of like, I wonder if my boss is like upset with me, or I wonder if that coworker thinks that what I said was dumb in session, where it's like this constant, like extra voice just kind of running in the back of the mind that can again create a lot of those physical sensations. And so it can be really confusing because it's like I don't have the stress, but I still have this anxiety. And so I think that's a helpful way for me to kind of differentiate it against it too, of like maybe before the stress was manageable, but now it's like, God, like this is just, I've been taxed for so long, and anxiety is now showing up to try to help me, which we're going to get into, because we do get to know anxiety as more, we're trying to get to know it as a friend versus an enemy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I know that we're going to talk more about kind of the functions that anxiety can tend to try to play. Doesn't always feel like it's trying to help you, but it's trying to do something for you. And so, even in the example that you gave of like having chronic job stress, that really invites anxiety to become a lot more long term. Often you're right, like anxiety can manifest as a reaction to chronic stress. Sometimes it's trying to, prevent stress from happening and does it in a really roundabout way that's not super helpful and feels more stressful oftentimes. we'll talk more about that too. But I agree, and I think we can also acknowledge that oftentimes anxiety shows up a lot more easily because of predispositions that we have, whether that's due to genetics, maybe there's some intergenerational trauma, especially in particular communities, that makes it a lot more likely that anxiety could show up, um, and or in reaction to traumas that have been experienced, in the past or even currently ongoing. And so there's a lot of contextual factors that weigh in to the likelihood of anxiety showing up, um, and the level at which anxiety can burst right through those doors and be like, I'm here. What's up? How can I try and help? Um,
Well, there can also be generalized anxiety too, where it's like, I just generally feel kind of this excessive worry. And that can be something that, again, as we were just saying a few minutes ago, it's like, I'm so used to feeling this way all the time. And it feels almost like if it's a part of you versus like something that just needs to be managed that can be more like associated with stress, like stress management, for instance, versus like, I mean, a lot of what we are talking about is going to be ways to manage anxiety, but it's a little different because it becomes so, like you said, internalized oftentimes.
yeah, it definitely can. And so it can be something that's very, very much there on a regular basis, as well as shows up more often in certain situations. So let's dive into that a little bit more. Like, when does anxiety show up? How does it show up? We know that that looks really different for different people. Anxiety, how it manifests in our body can look really different between me and between you. Um, Even in the same family, it can manifest really differently. But I think one thing, in addition to kind of a lot of the things that we've talked about already, right, of like having those physical sensations of like higher heart rate and, worrying thoughts that you can't really break away from, those intrusive thoughts sometimes, sweating profusely or stumbling over your words or multiple different ways. Those are some ways that anxiety really likes to show up for me.
Mhm.
Um, but there's multiple different versions. And I also think something that I tend to see anxiety latching onto is like our um, different behavioral responses. So usually it could be related to stress or trauma or what have you. You've probably heard of them in those contexts, but our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses, if you're not familiar with those, um, our nervous system can go into hyperdrive evolutionarily, like from when saber-toothed tigers were around and we had to protect ourselves pretty immediately. And now in, you know, the modern world, we've adapted that to be worried about like, did I leave the oven on? But the fight response is obviously we're gonna stand up for ourselves, take care of business, and protect ourselves and our families. Flight is we're going to get the heck out of there. Freeze is I'm frozen, stuck, don't know what to do, can't move because my physiological system is shut down. And fawn is one that people may not be as familiar with of feeling like you have to cater to what other people need and want in order to protect yourself as well. And so I know anxiety tends to latch onto those, but I'll pause here and get your thoughts, Manny.
No, I think that's a helpful breakdown. And I think as you're saying all of that, it's important to just really get curious around how anxiety does show up for you and maybe how it's taken different shape over the course of your life too. I think it can be confusing because I mean, I'll give a personal example that when I was learning about anxiety in grad school, I remember being like, whoa, that's what I've been feeling this whole time. And I know I have a lot of clients who've experienced that as well. I have people in my life that are like, I've never really experienced this kind of constant feeling of worry and dread and just, discomfort. It's like, what is going on? Like, it feels like there's a problem. And for me, I definitely felt that way in grad school. And then I remember talking to my mom, no shame on you, mom, for this whatsoever. But I was like, yeah, mom, I think I'm anxious. And she was like, well, yeah, like you remember when you were a kid and you used to go to the nurse's office all the time because you had a tummy ache? And I was like, well, yeah. She was like, well, yeah, honey, you're feeling anxious. And I was like, oh. And I think back then, I mean, it might have been more described as like, oh, you've got some nervousness or you got some butterflies in your tummy kind of thing. And, I have so much empathy for that that small child that, back then was probably very similar to how the adult self of me is now, of like always thinking about the future and, struggling to grapple with the uncertainty and trying to find comfort in that, which is a lot of what we'll be kind of talking about today. But, for me, I just think about that and I think it's important to share here because I think it can show up differently. That when I was a kid, it was more like tummy aches, physical sensations, and it could have been more outbursts of emotions too, of like not knowing how to handle all the big emotions or worry that maybe I was experiencing. And then, thinking about moving through college and moving through like young adulthood and being in the thick of adulthood and raising a kid now. And I see how, okay, well, it's taken a different shape now. I've got a kiddo and definitely can relate and remember and still continue to experience some anxiety in the role of a protector and nurturer for my kid. And so it's just, to me, I feel more at ease in talking about it in this way, which is being able to see it as this separate entity, if you will. Like earlier, I said, it was kind of like an elephant. Sometimes it does feel like that big elephant, but as I'm talking about it now, I'm like, okay, like I kind of see this little, this anxiety fairy that's showed up for me when I was a kid, showed up for me all through different like developmental points of my life, and I still feel it now. But yeah, I think that it can look differently. So the anxiety that I experienced as an adulthood was very much more in my brain than anything. I mean, I still have physical sensations from it, but I definitely know that I am a person who has 175 tabs open in my mind, and I have to be really thoughtful about, whoa, your system hard drive is about to shut down or about to, burst or something. It feels that way sometimes. So let's manage it. Let's close some of those tabs down. So yeah, I think as we're having this conversation, just get curious about your own experience too, because I think that's what's so hard about talking about this is that it looks so differently for everyone. And Sapna and I aren't here to tell you like this is how it is and that's it. This is how you treat it and that's it. It's more of like this is how we start talking about it, getting to know it, and then you can kind of like get to know your own and figure out what does your own anxiety need as we kind of get going here.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Because it's so true. Anxiety can tend to look so different at our different stages of life. And oftentimes we don't realize. I actually give your mom huge kudos for recognizing that those physical sensations that you had growing up, that was actually anxiety. And she didn't necessarily need to tell you, like, hey, you're having anxiety. Like,
Might not have been helpful.
right, exactly. But very impressive that she was able to recognize that. And, I'm sure there's multiple scenarios looking back in my childhood that there was. Anxiety has been very ever present for me in my life, and it has shifted my relationship, and kind of the winds of when anxiety tends to show up has shifted as well. But I also appreciate you kind of naming that we both, I think, agree on that approach of tending to refer to anxiety as something external from us.
Mhm.
And that's definitely a therapeutic approach that I utilize, I think you utilize, and that's also been helpful for me personally to kind of know that anxiety is outside of me. It's not me. I am not anxious. Anxiety is a very constant companion,
Mhm.
and it helps me to understand anxiety that much more. And that's what the purpose, I think, of our podcast today, our episode today, is, as Manny was saying, was hopefully it might be an approach that could be helpful to you. It very well may not be. You might be at the point of your relationship with anxiety where you're like, F this S. Like, I don't give a crap what it's trying to do. Like, I just want it managed. It just needs to go away. And 1,000% get that. 100,000% get that. Totally valid. Hopefully, some of the strategies that we touch on towards the end of the episode might be helpful. It's possible they may not be. It's possible that the approach that each of us takes is not the most helpful for you, in which case we have some pals that might have an approach that could be more helpful for you, could be more beneficial to you, and or hopefully whenever you are able to address it with the help of a mental health professional, they can speak in a language that is more helpful to you as well. But we're sharing one avenue.
Yeah.
That is also one that we tend to choose. And so I'm trying to figure out where to start. There's a lot around just kind of getting to know anxiety. We've talked about getting to know the function it serves. And so
You were
that could
starting
be
to kind of talk about that just a second ago of like, what is the purpose of anxiety? Because if we want to get to know it, we need to understand it. And for me to understand it is for me to understand like, you just came into my house. How can I help you? What are you here for? And to kind of we're saying externalize, but it's also like personify sometimes can be really helpful of like, anxiety. I use the fairy probably because we're always talking about fairies in our household. And so to me, I'm like I'm gonna keep on that. It's like the little anxiety fairy that appears. I'm like, okay, welcome. What do you need? And also like, you know what, I think we've taken care of all your needs right now. You're free to go. But the first question is around like, what is the function, which is what is the purpose of this? And so I think, there's all kinds of different examples that, we could probably run through, but maybe since I already shared, the example of being a parent, that might be a good place to start, which is, I mean, if I had zero anxiety in being a parent, that makes me actually anxious just thinking about it, which is a little confusing as I say, but it brings me great concern if a parent has zero anxiety, because I think there is a helpful amount of anxiety as a parent. And so the function of anxiety as a parent is being able to help keep our kids safe. And so having a helpful amount around, whether it be me, if she's out riding bikes, me thinking, okay, she's riding her bike, I could be excessively worried and thinking about all of the worst case scenarios, being fueled by that anxiety. Or I could start thinking, okay, what's helpful about me thinking about that scenario? Is there anything that I can kind of do with this? Or how do I keep this anxiety a little bit in this helpful range of like, all right, let's get your helmet on. Let's make sure you're wearing the right shoes. What do we do when we see driveways? What do we do when we see stop signs? And just like, those are the things that can help keep my kids safe, which is why anxiety showed up, was to help me keep my kids safe. But for me to, and I unfortunately, this is how anxiety likes to sometimes show up, is that we can do those things and it still wants to hang around and be like, you sure? You sure you did that? You sure? You sure? And so I think, we're have to be able to kind of zoom out a little bit and wonder like, has it achieved what it needed to? Has it helped me as it can? And then if the answer is yes, then it's like, okay, I need to redirect my attention into like, these are some strategies we can talk about more, but into the current moment, like, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? What am I experiencing in this moment, away from just this, this is excessive worry. So that's kind of how my mind breaks it down of like, I need a little bit of it, but I don't want so much of it that I can't enjoy a bike ride with my kid because I'm too worried and it's hijacked my experience, right?
Yeah, I so love that example, and I so appreciate you starting with that. I think that's so helpful to hear as an example of what function anxiety is trying to serve oftentimes and how it often can be helpful, because I think it might be helpful to also rewind slightly and just acknowledge, like, it might sound weird AF for us to be talking about like how anxiety is helpful, how it's
Mhm.
functional. I know oftentimes if I haven't laid more like enough of a foundation with clients and I start to try and um examine anxiety from a way of like, how is it trying to help you? I get a lot of weird looks. And like,
You're like, it isn't.
I,
It's terrible.
right, exactly. It's kind of a bitch and I don't want to deal with it. Like,
For
what do
sure.
you mean it's trying to help me? And
Hmm.
so I just want to rewind and acknowledge like that's very valid as a reaction and a response people might be having in hearing this, and also in hearing your example. Like, there is a certain degree of which anxiety in moments can be trying to be helpful. So in protecting ourselves, our kid, our family, in trying to prepare us to make sure that we can do everything that is within our control to protect ourselves, our kid, our family. Um, that's often the way that anxiety can be helpful. Even just thinking about future scenarios, I know that anxiety can be trying to help in making sure that I feel like I can be prepared for those scenarios, whatever they are, kind of scary, uncertain scenarios. Maybe I can make them more concrete by putting something out there, maybe even the scariest version of this is uh, more trivial but still very real fear for me of I see a snake on my walk. And so what am I gonna do? I'm gonna slowly back away, like, small things like that, but also kind of so you know what you can do, because oftentimes our brains go into panic, may not realize what to do in the moment. So if we've thought about it in advance, that can be helpful to a degree, right?
Yeah.
Like, only to a degree. Sometimes it can be too much. Sometimes it is unhelpful. And so that's kind of the part that we start to be able to recognize how much do we want to lean on it and utilize it. But again, I feel like we keep getting ahead of ourselves and talking about that part, because I think it might be helpful to keep breaking down ways in which anxiety can be helpful, can try and attempt to be helpful, because oftentimes it's anxiety is attempting to be helpful, but in a very misguided way that's the opposite of helpful. Sometimes it can be trying to help prevent stress, right? If we go back to the workplace example, I experienced a lot of chronic stress in my workplace, and I really don't want to experience that again. And anxiety kind of steps in to try and prepare you so that you can address all the different scenarios and make sure you're doing the best job that you can. But also, if it's creating a stress response within you, that's the opposite of helpful, too, right? So there's two degrees to which anxiety can be helpful versus unhelpful. Um, and there's multiple versions of that.
Well, and I think it really is a question that I'll, kind of nudge my clients to try for themselves of like when you find, let's talk about health anxiety for a second. I help a lot of clients that have been diagnosed with cancer, have had other chronic health conditions, and anxiety is without a doubt something that we're talking about in most of our sessions because it is or can be incredibly pervasive into just their day-to-day experience. And so, there's this common phrase amongst clients that have to go do routine scans. And, a lot of my clients who have cancer will say like the scanxiety of that. Like it's just the, oh, okay, like my next MRI is coming. And like, it's one of these things where when we start talking about it, and we try to first acknowledge it. You're feeling anxious. Makes perfect sense why you feel anxious. And maybe I am jumping ahead a little bit here, but we'll get to the function, which is like, first we honor the fact that you feel anxious. And then it's like, well, how can this anxiety help you in this situation? And in this case, when it comes to like an upcoming MRI, I think it's like, okay, well, thank you for showing up, anxiety. Maybe we're not that positive about it, but we see you, anxiety, and we know that there's something important around the corner. And we have a lot of feelings about that, and a lot of those feelings are overwhelming and hard to, even identify at times. And so, what we want to do now is when we feel this pervasive sense of anxiety, is start asking like, what can be helpful about this? So, going to that question of like, how can I use this to help me? And I think I'm repeating a little bit of what you just said, but how can I help use this signal that anxiety is telling me to prepare for this scan? So, I've definitely helped a lot of clients where preparing, like, what is the night before your MRI going to look like? What specifically are you going to do? And let's talk about that. What are you going to do the next day? What, essential oils are you going to have on hand? What beverages are you going to have on your way to the appointment? What visual are you going to be focusing on during that MRI? And like actually having some conversation around how to prepare. And so all of a sudden it's like, hey, thank you for joining us, anxiety. Again, maybe I should stop thanking anxiety. But like, we see you again, and we're grateful that now we have this information that we can use to help prepare ourselves, so that strangely enough, it can really help. Like, anxiety is like, okay, like you've done something with me here. Like, thanks for delivering something of action to me. Now I can kind of calm down a little bit. But I mean, that's one that can be ongoing. And so it's almost can feel like the mental Olympics to go back and forth. Is this helpful? What could be helpful? And so I just want to acknowledge that too, that it's, I'm starting to talk about like some practices here, but within that, it is being able to recognize like, if I'm just sitting here at, 8 p.m., 5 days before the MRI, just thinking about it, is that helpful? And then
Yeah.
that's a question. Once you ask, if the answer is no, it's like, okay, what can be for myself right now? And hopefully that kind of helps you feel a little bit more empowered with it, that anxiety isn't
Yeah.
over control. And you had a really good metaphor on this too, of like, how does anxiety like take control, or what? Yeah, share that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Go
so I do have a metaphor that I often use with clients around anxiety, around multiple factors, but anxiety specifically because it tends to be pretty pervasive. And so I also want to preface this of like, again, part of us understanding the function behind anxiety is like a tenet in our field as marriage and family therapists is like everything makes sense in context. There's a reason why anxiety is present. There is a need that anxiety feels like it needs to try to meet for you so that you can be functional, so you can continue, so you can be safe, etc. And so I use the metaphor of a car, and oftentimes anxiety feels like it needs to be in the driver's seat. Often long term, like it feels like it needs to be the one driving. You stay in the passenger seat, if not in the back seat, and it keeps going. And for the sake of our mental health, physical health, physiological health, relationships, that's not always the most helpful relationship to have with anxiety, to let it just stay in the driver's seat, because that's going to be really taxing on your nervous system. And so it's getting to the point of understanding, kind of like you were saying, Mandy, of like, when is it helpful for anxiety to be in the driver's seat? So I'll give a personal example. My relationship with time is very fluid, and anyone who knows me knows this. And anxiety tends to show up for me around any type of scheduled anything really. But specifically, if I'm trying to get somewhere at a certain time, anxiety will show up to kind of help me stay on track, make sure I continue with a sense of urgency so that I give myself the best chance of potentially being on time. And I recognize that anxiety is helpful within that. And also, it gets to a point where this is funny because I'm literally driving usually at that point, not metaphorically, but in a literal sense. And at that point, I realize like I'm literally in the driver's seat physically, and I need to also metaphorically be in the driver's seat at that point, because anxiety is not helpful when I'm driving wherever I need to go. There's not a whole lot that I can do that's within my control at that point to change whether I'm going to be on time or I'm going to be a little late. And so that's when I would need to tell anxiety, like, hey, time for you to go in the passenger seat, maybe in the back seat. If I can get you in the trunk, that'd be great. And I tend to make that happen personally, like by trying to get back into the present moment, kind of like you mentioned before, Mandy. Also doing some breathing exercises if I can really feel the physical effects of anxiety going real strong. And also just turning on music, like really just enjoying the drive, like enjoying the city I get to be in. Small things like that that kind of just ground me back again. And what is the energy that I hopefully will bring to wherever I'm going to, et cetera, et cetera. And so understanding when it's helpful for anxiety to be in the driver's seat, when it might be better for it to be in a passenger seat, and getting to that process is a thing. Like it is not an easy thing to just be like, all right, time to get in the passenger seat. Like especially if anxiety is very accustomed to being in the driver's seat. Um, it can be very much a process and can take a lot of time to practice, even recognizing when anxiety's driving, let alone when it's helpful for them versus unhelpful versus when we're ready for it to not be in the driver's seat anymore.
Well, and speaking of driving, I mean, there are many people who have driving anxiety too. And
Yeah.
so to kind of keep with that metaphor slash the literal sense of it, I think that that can be yeah, it's interesting. It's such a tricky relationship because, most people, especially in the area that we live, driving is the more convenient route versus like, I mean, there are options for public transportation, but most people feel the need to drive or it's easier to drive to, North Austin, for instance. And the drive to North Austin also requires freeways and different things like that. And so I've definitely had several clients over the years that have struggled with being behind the wheel. And to your metaphor, it's like they're both trying to squeeze into the front seat. Like, I got the wheel. No, I got the wheel. No, I got the wheel. No, I got the wheel. And even as I'm saying that, I think that that is a practice that what you were just saying, it takes practice to be able to even visualize what is going on in that experience because the most frustrating thing that I'll say for me that it comes to anxiety is that it takes such a physical hold sometimes. And once those physical triggers or those sensations set in, then it's like we're not just in the front seat, like you're the one in the trunk. And you're like, hold on, like I'm trapped in this. This is not a good sensation. And now I'm having to be behind the wheel driving and at that fast pace it can be just so incredibly disorienting. And so I think that first just like acknowledge and validate the struggle there, but I also think driving is a very interesting thing because there is preparation that you can take before, because I've had clients that it's like the anticipation is almost worse than being behind the wheel. But then it's like, okay, if you're having that anxiety before getting behind the wheel, what are some things that you can, again, you look at anxiety and say, all right, like maybe I can have like a general route that I feel good about, or maybe I can like, kind of group my route so that I'm not, I don't have too much prolonged sense of driving or whatever it may be. And then also just kind of imagining yourself like having a like drive where you're actually the one in the front seat and like what do I need so that I feel like I'm the one in control of the car and anxiety is the quiet passenger in the back. And so it's again, I mean, you were kind of saying this already, but it's like I have the music or the podcast I'm listening to on my way. I have, to insert other like sensory type things to help ground. But I think that's the other thing about driving is I've definitely experienced driving anxiety, especially on I-35 where I'm like, oh my gosh, like this feels just bad. And it at the end of the day, like it is the most present thing you can do is by keeping your hands on the wheel and feeling the steering wheel and the texture of the steering wheel, looking out at the cars and how fast are the cars moving, how slow, what do they look like? And so it can actually be this moment where you're like, I see you, anxiety, I'm well aware, but like I want you to hang out in the back so that I can like stay very directed in this current moment. But as I'm saying this, I'm like, this is easier said than done too, where it is such a practice and it's something that requires maintenance too, you know? And so if this is something that you struggle with, I just want you to know that, you know, it is possible to put anxiety in the back seat, you know, when you're driving or in some of these other cases that we're talking about. But it is something that I think it helps to talk it out, and it helps to talk it out with someone outside of you
Mhm.
to, since it is so internal, to be like, hey, give me some perspective. What are some other ideas? So that when you feel anxiety showing up, you're like, I see you, but this is the route we're going, and this is the air in my car feels great right now. We're going to focus on that, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. I love those techniques, and I also do exactly kind of as what you're saying, that like acknowledge this is easier said than done. Even a lot of the components that we're talking about so far, of like even just acknowledging anxiety and be like, I see you, that is also can be advanced depending on the nature of how, for lack of a better word, rabid anxiety has been at the wheel for so long. Like
Mhm.
it may be hard to even recognize in that moment where anxiety creates such a physiological response that you don't even recognize that that's what's happening. And that might be the very first step for many people, is just being like, oh, right, that's anxiety. Okay, there's that. That's there right now. And just recognizing that can be a first step. Practicing doing the breathing throughout the day, so it's something that becomes a little more of a habit, so that when you're in a heightened state and your thinking brain is not as functional thanks
Mhm.
to anxiety, then that's something that you can naturally fall back on. And I know we're getting into this, but like just acknowledging, before we get more into like managing anxiety, I think it's kind of like it's not a one or the other. They're kind of tied together conversations, but just acknowledging that a lot of these are a lot harder. This is a lot easier said than done kind of throughout the process. So like baby steps are very, very important and very, very useful. A lot more than we often realize.
Yeah.
On that note, social anxiety can be also something that we need to take baby steps with, because it's often trying to protect us from how others view us, making sure that we can like make positive connections, maintain those relationships, or just not look like a fool in front of other people. And it's so easy to fall prey into those thoughts as well. Um, yeah, just the main function for social anxiety that comes to my brain is protecting a little bit. Um, any further thoughts on your
I
end?
would say like protecting and preparing too, because, you know, I can think of a session that I had not so long ago where my client was like, I said something in this meeting and like, all I could think about the rest of the night was that what I said. And so we talked about it. We're like, okay, so it seems like there's something about that meeting that caused, in this case, there could have been some stress involved too. But the after the fact, where I'm still thinking about it, I'm still processing it over and over and over again. It's like, okay, you were just saying this, let's name it to tame it. All right. I'm dealing with a little bit of social anxiety right now. I feel anxious about how that meeting went. Okay. I feel anxious about what other people thought about me during that meeting. Okay. I can accept that I feel this way, and that it doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be bad. It can just be the fact that I felt that. And then I think it gets into, kind of a lot of curiosity of like, what's behind that? What's happening? Why am I feeling that way? Can sometimes be helpful, or what is it maybe that I was needing in that meeting? I think it's probably more helpful is to use more of the what am I needing? Because I think in this case, I wasn't as prepared as I could have been. So when someone asked me a question, I was having to backpedal and say this and like use this. And so I was rambling and like, guilty. I've done that a million times over the course of my life where I'm like, God, if I would have been more prepared. And so then that's where you said this earlier today, and I loved it. It's like hindsight is insight, where it's like wonderful. Well, I'm going to stop using wonderful and thank you in this context. It sounds too positive. But the point is like, this is helpful now. Thank you, anxiety. I understand that that experience has taught me that the next meeting I go to, I'm going to do one other thing to kind of help me have some, more confidence in that moment to respond. And it might even be that if I don't know the answer to all these questions, because that's unreasonable to feel like you need to know and always be on, that it's like maybe we practice how to handle those situations in that moment where you can say like, oh, that's a really good question. You know what? I'm going to write that down and then I'm going to get back to you later. And so now anxiety has shown up, has informed us that, there's a little bit of action that we can take. And so I think it gives that opportunity to then prepare for the next meeting. They ask a question, I don't know the answer. I'm like, I got this. You know what? That's a great question. I'm not sure, but I'm going to follow up with you. And then it's all of a sudden you're like, anxiety, we gave you what you needed, and now hopefully those types of strategies can help too. But yeah, social anxiety, I mean, there's so many different examples of this too that are not work related as well. I mean,
Yeah,
I find myself
absolutely.
even with people that I love and care deeply, and I know that they love and care for me, like there can be times afterwards where I'm like, what was I saying there? Like, what was that? And sometimes it might be, I'm like, okay, like, man, Mandy, you've had kind of a wound up day. And there's not like anxiety is not really helping you here. Anxiety is just persistently hanging out with you. And, I don't really have anything to worry about. These people love me. They're not going to sleep thinking, what a weirdo that we just
Right.
hung out with. They're thinking we hung out with Mandy, period. And I know that in my heart. And so
Mhm.
sometimes I think the strategy can say, like, hey, we see you, but there's not really much we can do for you. And this isn't really helping me. And I can't help you. So good night.
Yeah, yeah,
Anxiety, go to bed.
definitely. Right. I love that. And I want to name like kind of a very much of a self-compassionate kind of lens that we both kind of attempt to take. I think I'll speak for me. You let me know if you agree or not, but like in my personal life, as well as in my clinical work, and I also want to acknowledge like I think that's the nature of your relationship that you've gotten to with anxiety, that you're able to get to a point where you can say thank you and acknowledge and be grateful for. And that may not be where other people are, and that's perfectly okay. They may never want to get there. That's also okay.
Yeah.
But I think that's such an evolved way and self-compassionate way and just compassionate period of like anxiety's trying to help. It's trying to meet a need. What is the need that anxiety is trying to meet? And so I think this is me kind of transitioning here into more intentionally like anxiety is trying to help in this way, but it's not super helpful. So how do we address that?
Mhm.
Of just starting to understand from my perspective, this is kind of what I do in my work with clients is what need is anxiety trying to meet here? And that's a large part of why we thought it was important to kind of provide some of those examples and a context of understanding like, okay, for me, for example, anxiety is trying to keep me on track so that I can get my butt out the door. And that's helpful to me because without anxiety, I tend to just lollygag and I get distracted and I forget that there is a timeline that I am on. And there gets to a point where anxiety is no longer meeting that need. It is not helpful. And what I need is to just calm down my nervous system.
Mhm.
And so actively understanding like when those moments are that anxiety is no longer helpful. Again, for some people, that might be consistently. Anxiety is never helpful at this
Mhm.
point in their relationship with it. And so starting to actively notice when anxiety is taking over, what need it's thinking that it's trying to meet, and how can we ourselves meet that need.
Mhm.
So maybe instead of letting anxiety take over, I get into more alarms that I'm setting on my own and a lot more streamlined procedures or what have you that I'm still working towards, let's be real. But that would ideally be a version of me meeting those needs for myself without anxiety necessarily needing to step in on a regular basis. And hopefully we'll get to that point. But for the time being, we're going to lean on it. We're going to lean on anxiety.
Yeah. Well, and as you're saying that too, I think it's one of these situations where a trauma reaction, for instance, when anxiety strikes, a lot of times, or we could assume that the body feels like it needs to get into that heightened state to protect us, but there aren't actually any threats currently in front of us that are in need of protection, but yet our body doesn't and our minds don't really like this is it can be beyond our control. And so I want to acknowledge that too, where it can happen without us thinking of anything. Or, I mean, this can get very subconscious with trauma being very much stored in like a cellular level in our body. And so I think that is where it is helpful to, as we're talking about this, say like we have to manage it too, where it's not as much of like, the question of is this helpful or not helpful sometimes may not apply. It might be like right now I need to have an intervention or a immediate go-to strategy when this anxiety does hit me. And as I'm saying that, I think it might be helpful to say that this can show up in like an anxiety attack where it's like maybe that slow burn to an attack, or it can be something that wakes you up in the middle of the night, rapid heart rate coming out of your chest, like what is happening? And I didn't even have any thoughts. And now how am I supposed to like personify this thing if it's just so physically taken over? And so I think, you know, breathing is obviously, something that we all can do as we are alive on this earth, but also that can be a really tricky one to just jump to when it feels like your physical system can be a little offline or hijacked in some ways. And the reality is your nervous system can get so dysregulated to the point where we don't really have the cognitive ability in those moments to reason in that anxiety. And so I really want to be tender with that too, because I think that, what you were just starting to allude to, Sapna, is like these proactive ways of starting to like care for ourselves and meet our needs. And I do think it starts with like really being thoughtful and trying to attune to our breath work. And I mean, going back to the driving thing, I had a fellow therapist tell me this one time that like when you're driving out, it doesn't matter what's going on in your life. When you're out driving, when you stop at a red light, make that your cue just to take a couple of really deep inhales, a couple of really deep exhales. I find myself already putting my hand on my heart of just like, okay, like I got you, body, like I got you, anxiety, like I'm here with you. I'm taking care of you right now. I think is a practice, but I also think that there are so many other different types of strategies in the moment that we started to allude to earlier too, like some of those visual strategies. I mean, sometimes, and this is when I learned like way back in the day when I was helping more adolescents with anxiety, actually, was the visual strategy of like, my body is feeling all of this, but I want to practice in therapy a moment that brings me ultimate peace. And I'm talking like the most peace you've ever experienced or the most peace you could ever imagine experiencing. Where are you? What are you doing? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you feeling? Again, I'm bringing in all of those senses, which is the part of the grounding of the nervous system. And so I think that, it is proactive in the sense that you're trying to plan ahead, but then it also is that practice that when your body does feel like, whoa, what just happened? That you don't have to try to retrieve the intellectualizing of this and trying to figure it out in the moment. You're more so like, I'm going to go to Tulum right now and be on the beach. And I'm really going to feel the air hitting my skin. And I'm just going to like really try to take my mind there as much as I possibly can and as gentle as I possibly can. Be like, what's that? What's that? That ocean is so calm. Look at those waves. The water is so clear. And I'm like, what is that bird over there? What are they? And really take yourself there. And that's just the first strategy that came to mind as we're talking about this. But I do think it is like part of our practice and getting to know anxiety is also to get to know what your anxiety likes for soothing specifically.
Yeah. And I super, super appreciate you bringing that up and making that point of it is not always a conscious thing. And even when it is, it takes a lot of practice to get to that point. And oftentimes there is trauma-related responses that might be in play. And so it really is just a more like immediate, like, what do I need in this moment? And kind of, again, using that hindsight as insight after the fact, ideally, as much as you can, to understand better, like, what did I need to give myself in that moment? Like, screw anxiety. Like, what did I need for myself? Like, did I need to escape to the bathroom and get out from the stimulation that I might be experiencing? Or do I need to sit down in a chair and do a grounding exercise similar to what you were saying, but kind of a classic one is also like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, engaging your senses as well. So just what are 5 things that I can see and name those? What are 4 things that I can touch? Name those. What are 3 things that I can hear? Name those. What are 2 things that I can smell? Name those. What is 1 thing I can taste? And kind of do it again, in reverse. What is 2 things that I can taste? What are 3 things that I can hear? And so I mean, there's any number of things that you can do, but I really appreciate that acknowledgement of like, it might just be very much a reaction that you need to protect yourself from in that moment and figure out what you need in hindsight and start to practice those as much as you can. I love the using the stoplight as a cue to like take deep breaths and like check in with yourself and just like understand if your shoulders are up here, like you can roll them back a little bit. You can just acknowledge like we're good, we're safe in this moment, we're right here. Um, yeah, super, super helpful to acknowledge those. Um, and yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I mean, as we're kind of, I mean, we could probably sit here and talk about this for another hour, truly. Like there's so many different things that keep popping in my mind. I'm like, should we go this direction? Should we go this direction? And I think ultimately the direction that um, everyone gets to choose as being part of our listening audience is just to start thinking about what are some of the things that do bring you peace and bring you calm, because I do think that that in itself could be work. Like, when do I actually feel relaxed? And what am I doing to feel that? And just start thinking about that. I think, we brought in a lot of stuff around sensory types of things, whether that be physical to help ground yourself, the breath work to help center and bring you back into that present, and also like, truly start to regulate your nervous system. I think those are all solid go-tos. I think the other thing to consider here is that, this is something that, we've talked about taking different shapes and throughout your life, and it's totally okay to also need additional intervention, whether that be other, outside of therapy, right? We're talking more around therapy and like talk therapy and how to like conceptualize this stuff for yourself. But, there's other modalities of like acupuncture can be very helpful. There's other functional, medicine doctors that can help with different things that, maybe outside of like an emotional experience. So there could be other things that are happening within the body that can cause that. I mean, one thing we didn't even touch on, but I just want to at least plant the seed is that, there's a ton of research and connection with anxiety and depression that's linked to gut health too. So there are other things that, lifestyle wise, that I think is really important from a proactive sense on managing anxiety to start thinking about too, because it, as we're talking about all of this, it's like our goal is not to put so much pressure on you to manage the anxiety that it causes anxiety. It's more of like, we want to get to know it. We really want to understand it and see, what is my individual relationship to anxiety and what do I find to be most helpful? Is it calling a friend, calling a loved one and talking it out? Just saying that stuff out loud can be incredibly helpful too, right? It could be sometimes that simple of having that outlet. And so I think that that's kind of where my mind goes as we're starting to wind down here. And I'm trying to think of, other resources. And I think, meditation can be very helpful. Mindfulness practices, yoga can be very helpful. But even as I'm saying that, it is important to note that there are times that when there is anxiety based on traumatic reactions, that meditation may not always be the best go-to. And so again, it's like listen to what your body and what your mind is telling you. And I think it's giving yourself permission to be like, let me just see what works for me, because it may even be that some medication is necessary from a psychiatrist to help, because there are also like comorbidities that anxiety can show up when it comes with depression, or like we were talking about trauma. It can also come up with adjustments and transitions of external factors, with grief and loss. I mean, it can come up with all kinds of other things. So, we're starting to talk about it. And we hope that this is helpful. And I'm trying to think of what are some kind of lasting things that we'd want to say in our closing here.
Yeah, so I think you started to really touch on a lot of what I want to make sure people take away. And one thing that you're starting to say is it's not any one thing that might be helpful in addressing anxiety. There are multiple things that individually can be very helpful, and that can also change based on the situation and the scenario and when anxiety is showing up based on certain triggers, for example. But it's usually a combination of things that is going to be most helpful and most effective. And we know research tends to show like a combination of medication and therapy, for example, tends to be very effective as a combination for people. Not the only effective combination for people, but one of the most, because it's combining multiple modalities. So just want that to also be said in combination with thinking of what are the things that help you get to the relationship that you ideally would want to have with anxiety. And even if that's just kind of shutting it out for right now, just so you can cope and you can survive, like find that happy place, like that can be a definite starting point. But it's just taking those baby steps to get you closer to where ideally like to be with anxiety, and know that there are those multiple factors that contribute to it. And it's not a linear process. It's a very, very circular with lots of twirly whirls and spinny spins within it too. It's more of a roller coaster than anything circular or linear and anything pretty than like that.
Mhm.
And just keep getting to know it. That's the benefit of the getting to know, is understanding like, okay, when we're on that peak of the roller coaster, I need this,
Mhm.
etc.
To me, that's the toolbox, right? It's like, what do you need
Mhm.
in your own toolbox to work with anxiety? Because I think, this just popped in my mind real fast that I have a client who I've worked with health anxiety for a long time, and it's been really beautiful to observe her figure out, what tools work for her and how she can put them in her toolbox, and also to hear her using those tools where it's like, you know what? I was in a place where there really wasn't a good spot for me to lay down, but I knew that's what I needed. And so I just made myself a little space and did what I needed to do because I knew that was my go-to in my toolbox. And I mean, then it's also possible to celebrate some wins around being able to use all of those tools after you do get to know what you need. And so I do want to like kind of plant that too, that like, it may feel really defeating and an impossibility, but I think the first step is just, after you get to know it a little bit better, then you can try to find ways to navigate it so that you're like, okay, like I'm more familiar with you now. I know what you need and I know what you don't need. And so we can work with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Of just meeting yourself where you're at
Yeah.
and learning how to work with yourself as well as anxiety
Mhm.
as best you can. And you're deserving of the support that you need. 100%.
So do you still feel anxious now? I still feel a little anxious, but I feel a little bit better talking about all this.
Yeah, it's subsided. She's still
Good. A
there,
little bit of
but
performance
in
anxiety.
a
I hope
more
people
of
like
a
this.
helpful way of like, hey, I helped you get through this. So
Yeah,
congratulations to us.
exactly. Exactly.
She likes rubbing it in my face.
Yeah, right. Well, we're just so grateful that everyone who decided to listen and join in this conversation, that y'all were here with us today. And we hope that the conversation of Sapna and I just like being real, going back and forth with how we think and how we talk about anxiety. We hope it's helpful in many ways for you, that you can start your own shift in how you relate to anxiety potentially. And we are going to be continuously looking for feedback from you all around ways that we can expand our conversation, for more resources to offer to y'all, because that is, accessibility to resource or access to resources is one of our main things with Zessio. So we already shared our information, but we look forward to y'all reaching out to us on social media. Please introduce yourselves and let's connect at my Zessio and or at zessio.com, zessio.com. And until then, we wish you well, and we look forward to our next session.
Yeah, thanks for joining, and feel free to send that feedback. We look forward to connecting with you, and until next time.